So virtualization, basically the idea of running a computer or some part of an operating system on top of your normal operating system is very useful. You can have more compatibility. We're recording, right?
I think so.
Okay. We just kind of very smoothly transitioned, I guess. Compatibility, you know, you have some games that only run on Windows, some software only runs on Mac, some things only run on Linux, all of those fun things. You don't necessarily want to have 4 different computers because you want something that runs on every single one of them. That's a mess. So we use some sort of virtualization. It also lets you share code pretty easily, share running programs. We'll cover it a little bit. The product that I'm aware of is called Docker. It's a really simple, kind of lightweight. We don't need to move forward yet.
Okay. Sure. I know you have a slide on Docker.
Yeah, I'm just going to touch on it really quickly here. You can send Docker images, is what they're called, and basically that's an operating system environment to allow people to run your code without the it works on my machine problem because you have some weird dependency or they don't have some weird dependency or something. Safety. We're going to deal with random shit that will break your computer. We might have malware. If you look at malware, if you download totally not illegal free software from the internet, who knows what that contains. So if you have a virtualized environment, you have some protection there because that will separate it from your main computer. You have all your fun banking, school information on your host. You virtualize away, you do your sketchy shit in there, and ideally, it doesn't hurt your important stuff. Big asterisk, it can, but that is at a skill level way above probably anything that you're going to get from standard malware or pirated video games, something along those lines. It's also a really great way to practice. There's a bunch of different like containers and virtual boxes we'll get into later that give you vulnerable machines, vulnerable environments, something that you can break, designed to be broken. They'll have walkthroughs and stuff like that. You know, that way you have something that you can break, and it's not going to be a big problem when you do. It's relatively cheap. I don't know what type of laptops most people have, but if you have more than 2 cores on your computer and like 8 gigabytes of memory, you can run like one virtual machine. It'll be pretty pretty low quality one, but you know, you don't have to buy a new computer, which is very nice. And you get to use many different systems. If you're on Mac, you can have a Windows, you can have a Linux, all that sort of stuff. Get familiar with a bunch of different things. So let's see, what's the next slide I have? So we have 3 main types of virtualization, type 1 and type 2 hypervisors. Pretty sure that's covered in 230. I know a lot of people are in there. All right, because that's what the lab environment's all in. Basically, these different types go from how much virtualization is between your software that you're trying to run and the hardware. You have a type 1 hypervisor.
Hyper-V, which is what
like Hyper-V, that's going to be what 230s run in. And for this one, this is a type 2, but you would have no host OS. So you just get really close to hardware. That's going to be a lot faster because the less layers. Think of it a game of telephone. You know, if your program has to talk to the operating system that's virtualized, that has to talk to the virtualization software, that has to talk to the OS, who has to talk to the hardware. Like that's 5 steps. That's just going to take longer. Then there's type 2. This is the type that I normally use. It runs on top of your host operating system. You virtualize the hardware. And then there are containers. That's not a complete operating system. These normally take a lot less resources in both disk space on your computer and in like processors and RAM requirements. A little less safe, a little bit more expendable, but easier to set up, cheaper to create and destroy.
So with the type 1 hypervisor there, is that, even though it has more access to your hardware, does it protect you from malware just as much?
It, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk,
Yeah.
It protects you just as much because malware is installed on your hard drive,
Mhm.
and each system will have its own separate chunk of hard drive, which you'll be able to completely wipe afterwards. Asterisks that we won't get into. And the only reason I know about these asterisks is this is kind of malware and like that sort of exploitation. It's a fun thing that I like to look into. And you can get a lot of like firmware style stuff that are really hard to get rid of. You want to hit the space bar? Okay, so this is kind of my current thing I'm trying to learn. So this is definitely not my expertise, but Docker is a super lightweight thing. It's kind of designed for software engineers. You create your application in Docker, you get all of its dependencies, you can easily share this back and forth. There's no, you have to have Python 3.10 installed rather than 3.9 or something like that. It just makes the dependencies, everyone can have the same system. It's semi-isolated, everyone can work together, and you have a known good system. However, we're able to use it to install something like Kali or Ubuntu, some of the Linux systems, and it can give you an interactive like bash shell, so you can run all your tools in there. This should work across every operating system, unless I'm unaware of something. So, for example, one of my current projects is try to develop a set of tools in a Docker container. So with like 2 commands, I could download my entire tool set to a local computer as long as I had Docker installed, and I could just have my home environment basically if I have to borrow some random software engineer's laptop, or like borrow on a pen test or something along those lines. But that's kind of my lack of understanding of Docker is showing right here. That's kind of all I know. It's a lighter weight one, like I mentioned before, container, run more of them. I've seen some things, you can have vulnerable web apps in here or something like that. So if you're looking at web app testing, I can point you in some areas that may have something like that if you want to break something in that cheapest type of virtualization. Next.
It's also commonly used in the cloud, like if you're doing Azure App Services, it usually uses Docker when you actually push the application.
And I think there's something about like being able to host multiple like clusters or something.
Yeah, Kubernetes clusters.
So
the main thing is the dependencies, because that's
Yeah.
annoying. Hey, this code doesn't work. No, it totally works. No, it doesn't work. It's because you have different dependencies.
consistent machines across areas can be a pain. Next, WSL. I'm assuming most people in here are running Windows of some form. This is something.
Oh.
Do you want to take this, or do you
I
want to
can
go for it?
kind of go for it. I know. So like you like install the Linux kernel, and it is sort of a virtual machine, sort of a container, all inside of Windows, and you can like run an app, and it will have the Linux terminal for it, like just be like a normal app. And it is only command line at first. But then there's also, it's like super easy to install, and it's great to have those Linux tools without having to go into virtualization software or like dual booting your laptop or something. It's just there and available, easy to install, easy to uninstall with one button.
I think we're going to try to help people install that after this talk. If people are interested in sticking around, you can install it. I don't think it takes too much space on your hard drive, does it?
A couple gigs maybe.
Honestly, I didn't notice any measurable impact when I was doing it,
No.
but yeah,
The
I would definitely
VMs
want
are
to.
gonna take up more space.
Yeah. So yeah, and this is also hard drive space. So yeah, this is a great chance. If you want to spin that up, you'll get access to the tools.
Oh, you can also like directly access your file system on both, like on your Windows and the subsystem and the Linux system that you're running, so that you can actually like use like File Explorer to manage things instead of like in a virtual machine where you like might have to SSH into it or do something weird to go move files around from one system to another.
That is one problem a lot of these virtualization containers have, is because we're basically convincing the computer that it's its own computer. It can be difficult to share files and communicate between the two.
Most also have a desktop environment that you can get with it if you're more comfortable with that and not command line focused yet.
All right, is that new? I thought when they looked at it.
For what? For
I-
WSL?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it like 2 weeks ago.
WSL?
And I have like kept So you can have like a Kali desktop environment.
I was gonna say, I've read about it, but I haven't used Windows WSL at all this semester because I've actually been running my laptop solely Linux, so I haven't been playing around with it or keeping it updated. So I don't actually know a lot about what's new because it's like actively being updated and developed.
Yeah, WSL 2, I know they added a lot of support for GUIs, and you can launch applications. Because it says only command line by default, but I know with the WSL 2 upgrade, you can run GUI apps from it, and it will open them because it has its own X server and stuff. So I don't know. That's all stuff we can play with. Like Nick said, we want to do a demo after this. If anybody, because I'm assuming most people are running Windows, and I don't know how much like familiarity anybody has with Linux, but even if you don't want to use WSL to run security tools and to do testing, it's still fun just to, it's the easiest way to try out Linux and just get used to the file structure and the commands you would run to get around it. So yeah, we're going to do a demo and we'll just, I don't know, mess around with it with everybody and answer questions while we go, I guess.
I can show off my install as well because I have both VirtualBox Kali Linux and WSL Kali Linux, so I can show off the difference if you guys want to.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
That works.
All right. Next, I believe we're talking about VirtualBox or VMware. This is kind of where I spend most of my time, happily and unhappily. I kind of discovered it in sophomore year and been playing around with it ever since. VMware is the paid-for version. I believe you do get a free license through Iowa State. One thing I would say is I feel like whichever one you kind of get comfortable with is what you're going to end up sticking with. So, you know, if you get a free license now, you'll probably be able to afford it just fine forever on. But there's a chance you'll be paying for it forever, or else you're going to be forced to switch halfway through, you know, in 3 years.
Would
Once
like
you,
to accidentally steal
I'm
it.
probably going to talk about the vCenter products.
Yeah.
Okay, this is VMware is not my expertise.
But like-
VirtualBox is.
I would say Composite 252, we actually use VirtualBox for everything.
So there's a couple big pros with having a VirtualBox because it's essentially another computer. You have the whole kernel, you have your own RAM assigned to it, you have your own processor assigned to it. Anything asterisk that can run on a normal computer can probably run on your VirtualBox. The only problems I've had are with video games. However, it's pretty computationally expensive to run. You have to assign its own processor cores, its own memory, and stuff like that. And because it's its own computer, it'll be doing all of its own background tasks. So this can be updates, refreshing RAM, you know, all of that stuff. And so you kind of get a kind of shitty computer. It's kind of laggy. It's not perfect, but it works really well for having a extra thing. So I can kind of go through a couple of the big like setting menus and whatnot and what you get to do with it. All right, setup first. Installing your VirtualBox is pretty easy. It can be a pain because computers will have safety features that prevent virtualization, which is a BIOS setting on most computers. So that can be kind of scary to have to restart and open up BIOS. It was for me the first time I did it. But you know, if you continue in this, you're going to be doing that sort of stuff a decent amount. So perfect place to start getting comfortable with it. You could install pre-made OVA images, and this is basically all of the information you need. You hit import, and you have a system. You have to wait 30 seconds for all the copying and whatnot. So the Buggy Web Application project, part of OWASP, has a bunch of like vulnerable websites that you're able to go on and attack. I've also seen stuff for doing binary exploitation. You'll have virtual machines to work on. You can have Kali or Parrot, whatever your preferred hacking distro is, or Ubuntu, and download your own tools. Basically, you have your own separate computer that you can spin up whenever you want. It's very nice. You can also install the computer, like if you don't have a pre-made image that you want, you can install it like a normal computer. You can get the ISO image, which is basically like the installation DVD from way back when as a file. Mount that in, you can go through the entire install process. I'm pretty sure you still do that in Computery 230.
Yeah.
for those who are/will take that class, but it's a little bit of a step-by-step process, but they're normally really good at hand-holding it. I also bet you could, if you have a DVD reader and an installation disk for like Windows XP from 20 years ago, you could put that installation disk in there and install it from that as well. Never done it, but it's kind of interesting to see if it did work. I believe we're next going into networking. So I'm pretty sure this type of networking is available for all of the virtualization containers. However, I've only ever worked with it in VirtualBox, so I'll be talking about it from that perspective. I'm going to assume that most of you don't have a super deep knowledge of how networking works in computers. So basically, you have your routers at home, and your computer will talk to your multiple computers will talk to that router, which will forward everything on to the greater internet, and that's called a NAT, network address translation. So that's the default for VirtualBox is to use your computer as a NAT. So nothing else on the network that your computer is on even knows you're running a VirtualBox. It just thinks you're requesting websites and packages as if it was from your computer. You also have a bridged network. This is where your computer, your VirtualBox, is able to access whatever like Ethernet cable or network card, and it pretends to be a whole other computer on the network. So whatever router your host is talking to will also talk directly to your VirtualBox. And then you can have an internal network, which is where you don't let your VirtualBox talk to anything besides other virtual machines on that computer. And that, for example, would be very useful for malware testing. Like you don't want your evil code that you don't trust escaping into your home network and infecting your TV or whatnot. You can also mix and match. You'll see that there's a NAT network, which is a combination of a NAT and an internal network, stuff like that. NAT and bridge are the good defaults to go to if you're playing around with this. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why my stuff wasn't connecting right, and it always comes back to this. Let's see, what do I have next? Is it resources? Yeah. So one of the fun things about VirtualBox and other virtualization frameworks is you can change the resources you give your computers. For example, if you're installing and updating, which is going to be kind of processor and RAM intensive, give it a bunch of RAM and more CPU power. Afterwards, when it's only running a website and so it doesn't need much, you can drop it down a bunch. You also see that you can give partial CPUs. So if you pull up you only give it one CPU, and you can also drag it down to only giving it half of the time on that CPU. From the guest operating system, the thing you're hosting, it would just look like it was a slow CPU core. You also see that you can change the boot order. It's a full new computer. And then what's the last thing I had on there? Snapshots. I've mentioned this briefly before. These saved my life a bunch. Basically, this is a exact copy of the state of your virtual machine before you do something stupid. So if you before keyword is before. I've forgotten to take snapshots and then wish I had. So basically, it takes a copy of the disk image, and then it will store stuff in a differential format, so it doesn't take up a mass amount of space on your disk, but it allows you to roll it back. I've also tried to play around some with like a base install of Windows 7, and then take a snapshot, and then have one path that was like for gaming, and then another path for malware development and stuff. And so you just install your tools for gaming, you take a snapshot, you revert back to the first snapshot, you install your tools for development type stuff, take another snapshot, and now you have like two different trees. It's a very fun feature if you use it correctly. You will take up more disk space, but it does save you if you make mistakes, as I often do. So that's kind of the end of the presentation that we have put together. Does anyone have questions?
It took me like 30 minutes
So when it comes to things like the distribution of like parent, Cali, all those things.
Yeah.
What would you recommend?
8 gigabytes of RAM.
This is a very personal choice, I think. I thoroughly enjoy Parrot as my base operating system. Kali, in my opinion, is much more of a collection of tools. But Parrot has stuff like a PDF viewer. So if you're normally going to be using it as like your main operating system, you need to look at PDFs. Like it's just something you need to do, and Kali doesn't have that, and Parrot does. In a virtual box or like a container environment, it matters less because you don't need to be using that to look at your PDFs.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
There's so many to pick from, so kind of.
There is. My recommendation is pick one, learn your best, and then change when you get bored with it or you get annoyed with it. You'll find something
It's easy
you
to
like.
change.
They're pretty easy to change. Pro of the virtualization maybe takes an hour or two at most to change. Any other questions?
John wants to talk about VMware
Yeah.
real quick.
So
Okay.
now that Nick has brainwashed you into loving VirtualBox, I'm gonna brainwash you into loving VMware products.
VMware really is better.
Okay, so you can buy this, or you can get this stuff for free at Iowa State. This is IT Engineering Iowa State software. Software for students. Scroll down to VMware. VMware software. I literally just Googled
I'm sure.
Iowa State University
It's a difference.
engineering software. Logged in with Okta. And if it's going to be slow, I already have it up. Yep, there's my Windows 10 that I bought earlier for free. So anyway, you find the products. Here they are. It's so confusing. There's so many. What do I do? Does anybody know what any of these are? No? Not really? Maybe? You use Workstation maybe or Player? Workstation Pro, yeah. So essentially you have Player. This is VMware. There's so many that I can't even. So there's 15 Player, there's 16 Player right there. So this is the newest version of Player. That is essentially the VMware equivalent to VirtualBox. Plays virtual machines locally on your host. So they've gone and done this wonderful thing called vSphere and vCenter, and that's what we're going to talk about. Because also vSAN and vRealize we don't care about because that's cloud stuff. vSAN is a specialized, so SAN is storage area network. So you guys have heard of a NAS, right? Network attached storage. So instead of just a boring network attached storage, we can do a storage area network, which is a lot smarter. So if we have like another product from VMware called Horizon, we can have an image of a domain joined computer like at Iowa State, and then spin up all the changes to that for each individual user, but we don't have to clone the whole image. We don't have to have an image of the whole operating system, just the changes for that one user. So that's the kind of stuff that vSAN allows. It's like way, way, way out of yours and my depth. But so the main ones are the Player, which is what Nick's talking about. It's a better version of VirtualBox. Then you have Workstation, which rolls a client for ESXi, which I have no clue what it stands for, but we're going to look at it and I'm going to show you it.
ESXi would be a type 1 hypervisor?
Yes. So if you have a computer laying around at home and you're like,
You need a dedicated computer to this.
yes,
So
it's a
if you have a
server.
spare computer.
It's a server, yes. So this is like the next step after you play with type 2 hypervisor. Yeah, go ahead.
Wait, so Workstation Pro is only ESXi?
No, Workstation Pro is a front end for ESXi.
You can also
I'll show
use-
you all of them in a minute, so you will understand. Except Player, because I don't have that one.
You can use
That's why I run
Workstation
my
Pro.
laptop.
Yes, Workstation is type 1 and type 2.
Oh.
So it's a front end, it's rolled together. It's Player rolled in with a front end application. And I'll show that to you in a minute here. So, you've gotten past that, you're like, I love virtualization, this is awesome, I can do anything. And so you've gone and set up an ESXi server. It looks something like this. It's really straightforward. You can see my host here with a bunch of free resources and a bunch of VMs running. Now, when you're on the Iowa State engineering software, you're like, okay, John, but what is vCenter? And why would I want that? So this is the vCenter management page, which we don't need. This is vCenter. So this is ESXi. This is vCenter, which is a management for ESXi servers. So now you're like, John, I ran out of resources on my first ESXi host. I need another one. You're going to need to put vCenter in front of that, right? So you have 2 type 1 servers, and then you put vCenter in front, and it can manage both of them into clusters up here. You see my home lab and cluster A. So there's multiple hosts. There's multiple hosts in this cluster, which create VMs in the same way. Here's a bunch of VMRCs, virtual machine remote consoles. I have an Active Directory domain controller here, a Windows box. I was gonna like try to pull up a quick attack, but I totally ran out of time after setting up the VM and stuff. And then I just put them both behind a pfSense box, right? So this pfSense, here it is in the Kali thing.
pfSense being a firewall.
Yes. So now I can run attacks from here in Kali against my domain controller and see what happens. I can change settings in Active Directory and run Bloodhound again, which Bloodhound is
A really
maps,
fun tool.
Yes, maps like domain trusts and users and what they have rights to. So if I compromise a user, and we're getting way off track, but if I compromise a user, we can see what they're trusted to and potentially do lateral movement. So it's really fun stuff to play with. Now, we talked about Workstation, which I have here. And so this is like the best of both worlds. This is the best of everything, because if you're going to use type 1 and you're like, oh yeah, maybe I have a computer, I get one at surplus or something, I'm thinking about setting up ESXi. If you use your key, you get 1 VMware key. If you use it on Workstation, you can run type 1 and type 2. So you'll see my computer, CPRE 431.2, I had to spin up a box for CPRE 431. They gave me an OVA. I plugged it in, just like it would also work in VirtualBox, but into VMware, and booted it up, and it worked. In addition, I also can connect directly to servers. So we'll do my server and just show you what it looks different, right? Because before we're talking about these web interfaces here, vCenter and ESXi. And now there it is. It's the same dealio, but it's just a front-end application, right? So you have like tabs that manage it here. You can power on, power off, virtual machine settings, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. That was like lightning VMware because I elected myself VMware Shmi. Any questions about VMware?
What should I do if I'm a beginner looking to just get into this? Which one should I go with?
Workstation.
So just you download Workstation and it'll pretty much be.
Yeah, you'll see this, but you won't see things in the left here. You can simply just go File, New Virtual Machine.
Okay.
And then follow
WSL.
or WSL.
I think
What do you want to hear about?
The biggest thing is picking something and just going for it. A trap I fell into when I was starting was going, well, I don't know which one to pick. I'm just going to spend forever trying to look at the pros and cons of each one. And that time spent looking at the pros and cons can be spent learning.
Pick one, throw yourself in, and Google will help you.
Yeah, pick one, throw yourself in, Google will help you.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I think, who is interested in seeing the basics of installing and getting WSL working if you have a Windows machine?
So you can use the Linux command line from
If people are interested, we can actually do that.
How many people are running Windows? Just raise your hand.
on a laptop or something.
Mac OS and Linux. We got 1, 2. A couple no responses and 2. Okay, cool. Bare metal people, I respect it. Join the club.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Japan player.
I can spin
and
up
then
a
you need
Parrot
an
VM.
OVA or an ISO rather.
Yeah.
That might be
So
more applicable.
I should have an ISO
Is
locally.
that what we want to do? I saw like 1 thumbs up. I'm just trying to look and gauge in the
There's a
crowd.
couple traps along the way that's like, what do I do here? I'm not sure.
I would say that one is more complex because if WSL is just really easy.
WSL, you
they've
can find a
made it much
YouTube
and much
video.
easier.
You find a YouTube video and then you're in a bash prompt like 5 minutes later.
Okay. So do you want to, you're ready to go and set up like an Ubuntu or Parrot or something?
I hopefully have some ISOs on here. I believe I do.
Otherwise, I'm pretty sure I have one on my laptop.
Yeah, it should be fine. Okay, so this is, we're just gonna do it. This process is gonna be similar. There's some like traps in VMware that are a little bit annoying. So we're just gonna walk through a custom advanced install. So all I did was file new virtual machine. So this is one of the things where you're like, okay, what do I do here? Well, one of the reasons is I clicked on custom advanced. And the other reason is there's multiple versions of support. Every year there's a new standard. So in this case, we're using Workstation 16. So I'll just make the hardware compatibility with Workstation 16. If for example, I wanted to take this box that I'm developing locally and move it to a remote server later, I could.
Something we don't need to touch on.
Probably something we don't need to touch on, but I could do that. I could make it compatible with ESXi.
One thing that I've learned through a lot of doing this sort of stuff is if you don't know what you're doing, the default's probably good enough for you.
Yeah. So we're just going to give it a boatload of memory and all the processor cores, it looks like. So installing an operating system. So we can use a physical drive like Nick was talking about, a CD drive, an ISO disk image. It looks like I have, this is vCenter, so we're not going to do that. We'll do...
And these are all going to be available online. For
Yes.
Linux distributions, they're very easy to find. Literally just your favorite
Ubuntu.
distro.
Well, you want to do
download.
Parrot?
No, just so this is what ISO is, where you like download Parrot and then.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is where you go to
ISO,
parrot.org or ubuntu.org and click download ISO.
Yeah. So ISO is a very standard format.
It's essentially a CD.
It's essentially a CD.
It's a disk image. It's an image of like a flash drive or a CD or some sort of physical media. So it's just raw bits.
That should be easy enough to find.
They're huge too, so
They
could-
are a massive pain in the ass to download.
4.5.
When I was in the dorms, I lived in Friley, the top floor, and walking downstairs cut it from hours to like 20 minutes to download stuff just because of the network speed. But like, it was still fast internet. It took me 20 minutes to download. I think some are 10 gigabytes of data.
Which is
They're a pain to download. They take up a lot of space on your local
Yes,
computer.
I don't even back up when I back up this, I don't back up ISOs because it's like, what's that, 40 gigs worth of just waste that I can download the new version if I need it.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's open desktop. So that I'm using an ISO image. You can also do it later. So we'll do next. Full name, John, username, email, password day. So this is out because VMware is great and it does things automatically for you. So we'll just fill it out.
Everyone take note of the length of passwords for brute
It's a
force.
very
today.
strong password. We'll give it a name. We'll call it Ubuntu demo. And it's going to tell me the location where the virtual machine is being stored. I can change it. And this is where I talked about you can move these things, right? If I made this compatible with ESXi, I could literally just copy and paste it to a remote server.
If you are able to send-
We'll just give it everything. I don't even have 32. We'll give it 16 processors, 1 core each.
And this is going to be the difference between someone who has a massive server in their closet versus the us
Just
normal
because
people.
I'm a terrible person,
No.
we're just gonna give it, yeah, that's fine, 128 gigs. Oh wait, I can't do that. We're doing this locally. Hold on. Oh, I can't have fun. No. Okay, so we'll do a couple gigs here, 2 gigs.
Yeah. So like this will directly be from your computer's processor.
Yes.
And directly from your computer's memory. I'm gonna guess the lowest performing computers we have in this room are gonna have like 2 cores and maybe 8 gigabytes of memory. And you can definitely run Linux operating systems with 1 core and like 2 gigabytes of memory. the less that you give it, the more painful it will be to use when you have it open. That's just the sad reality. I don't know of any way to get around that. Buy a more expensive computer.
Set up your own ESXi server.
That requires buying a server.
So what was that?
If you select recommended instead of the advanced option, are you still gonna set up your own IFC or ISO?
Yes. So even if you go easy mode and you click like just pick an image, it should work. The only reason I'm doing advanced is just to like show you some of the features and options and such. But you're gonna also have to answer this question about the networking. So Nicholas briefly talked about this, which is to use network address translation, host only networking, or no network, or bridge. So they're all different. You can read about them here. You're just gonna like kind of have to have a fundamental understanding of networking. Network address translation, your host computer will basically be a firewall, a router. So you'll get a private IP, and it's like nested routers, right? Because your host probably also has a private IP, and you're 2 NATs out from the internet. You can do bridged, which I believe is direct access to the hardware. So this MAC address of my wireless card will be assigned to the virtual machine, and my host no longer has a network interface. And then host only networking is it's using a
Now
virtual.
we're checking. You're not going to be able to escape unless you set it up.
What?
Your computer, your virtual machine will not be able to talk to the internet.
Yes.
This
So
is
it's basically a
one of the-
virtual switch that you plug your computer in and the virtual machine into. So it's only going to be able to talk to each other. There's not even any, I don't think there's even any DHCP or anything. That's going to be like an advanced, maybe.
This is something I just click next on and hope the
Yes.
default works.
NAT will always work. Bridge should generally work as well, but your host won't have access to the internet. This is advanced stuff. It's different if you're doing BSD. Don't do BSD. Do Debian. We're going to leave it on LSI, or SCSI. SCSI. Create new virtual disk. You can use an existing virtual disk or a physical disk. Again, for advanced users, we're going to create a new disk. Make it way smaller, like 15 gigs. So we can allocate disk space now. So this is, I think, where, again, things sort of break away from VirtualBox. Nicholas, can you do thin provisioning, or do you have to pre-allocate disk space?
It's thin provisions. By
Okay.
default, I think even.
Okay, so you can give your thing, if you got a 500 gig hard drive, you can give your machine, virtual machine 100 gigs, and as long as you don't check this box that says allocate all disk space now, it's only going to use the required disk space, and the image of the hard drive is going to grow as you need more data. So you still have space on your host. Like even if you gave it 100 gigs, it's only going to take up 5 or 10 until you start adding files and other things. So again, kind of just click next. And this is the virtual disk. It's asking me where do I want to save the virtual disk. That's perfectly fine. And we can customize the hardware. Just double check what we did. We did 2 gigs, 1 processor. We attached NAT network card and disk image here. So the rest of this stuff you can play with if you want. You don't really need it. Finish. And I pray to God this boots up because demos never work. VMware Workstation, 1 gig, swap space required, yes. So it's complaining about swap space, doesn't matter, please boot. Don't do devices. It's asking if I want to share PCIe devices on my host computer with the deal. What's that?
So at this point, it's just checking the file system. I don't know if we need to.
Yeah, it's checking the install disk, and then we're just going to waste time watching Ubuntu install. It's literally click, 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 bang, I have a virtual machine. If you get confused, there's tons of resources online.
This is one benefit if you've never touched Linux before, using Ubuntu or some other very popular one. They tend to have much more explainers and beginner friendly because they're super popular. So a bunch of beginners do them. So a bunch of beginners ask beginner questions. So a bunch of beginner questions get answered. Where Parrot, Kali are a little less popular. So they have less tutorials on how to do them.
One more quick thing I want to touch on with VMware. They have virtualized layer 2 switches, which is really cool once you start getting into networking and want to play with things.
Probably a little bit beyond what we're covering here.
It's got more features. Do VMware. That's all. I'm just trying to sell it to you. Virtual switches are great because
Sound like a VMware salesman.
basically, is my system frozen? Uh-oh.
I think our demo is basically done. We're gonna devolve back into talking to each other and complaining about different functions and probably get into a heated argument over which system's better. The
It's a
fact is,
discussion.
they both work. Take your pick. Paid for ones tend to be cleaner. They do have those benefits.
It just crashed my system, by the way.
It's so good. You have to use it.
Although I've never had.
It's because it's bare metal Linux.
I've
Also,
never
you
had
know,
VirtualBox do that.
try whatever you want. It's not hard to delete something and
True.
try something else.
Yeah. So a lot of getting into cybersecurity is just doing it, seeing if it works. It probably won't. You'll fight it for a couple hours. You'll learn something. Maybe it will work. Maybe you'll hate it for the rest of your life and move on to the next thing. Feel free to come up, ask questions, chat, hang out. I think we're done.
Yeah.
Unless either of you had.
Unless you guys have questions before we stop recording.